My name is Jordan Holloway, and I was 32 years old the night my father slid a white envelope across the dinner table to my brother. Inside that envelope was $60,000 for Kyle's down payment. And when I asked about my own plans, my mother folded her napkin and said, "You can rent somewhere, honey, you've always been fine." She said it the way you would tell a waitress the food was fine. My brother got a house that night. I got a compliment sharp enough to shave with. What I did over the next 18 months, my family never saw coming. And 2 years later, at that same table, on that same tablecloth, they asked me for something that still takes my breath away when I think about it. If you have ever been the one who was always fine, this story is for you. Now let me take you back to that dining room in Kettering, Ohio, where the whole thing started with pot roast, a white envelope, and a sentence my mother thought was a kindness. You need a little history to understand that envelope. In my family, money moved like water. It flowed downhill, and downhill was always Kyle. He was 4 years older than me, and his whole life came with a rescue package attached. When he totaled his Camaro at 19, my parents replaced it. When he quit college in his junior year, they paid off the loans so it wouldn't follow him around. When his credit card hit 5 figures at 28, my mother cashed a certificate of deposit she'd held since her wedding. Nobody ever sat me down and explained the rule, but I learned it the way you learn a stove is hot. Money in our house went to whoever was drowning. I never drowned. I worked summers at a snow cone stand, put myself through nursing school, and took a job in the pediatric intensive care unit at a hospital in Dayton. Night shift because it paid a differential. 9 years of it, I held other people's babies through the worst nights of their lives, then drove home at 7 in the morning and clipped coupons. My rent was cheap. My car was a 12-year-old Honda with a rosary hanging off the mirror that I kept because it came with the car. And here is the part nobody at that dinner table knew. By the night of the envelope, I had $48,000 sitting in a savings account I had built $500 at a time since I was 23. I had never mentioned it. In my family, having money you didn't need was like having a porch light on in the daytime. Nobody saw the point of it. They were about to teach me exactly what the point of it was. It was a Sunday in March, pot roast night, the good tablecloth with the ivy border. Kyle had been talking for 20 minutes about a house on Sycamore Trail, 4 bedrooms, $285,000, granite countertops. He said granite countertops 3 separate times like it was a spell. He was 36 and between jobs again, consulting, which as far as I could tell meant sleeping until 10. Then my dad reached inside his jacket and slid the envelope across the tablecloth. $60,000, he said. Your mother and I have been talking. It's from the retirement account. You can't get a start these days without help. My mother had her hands folded like she was in church. Kyle's eyes went wet and he hugged them both, and I sat there with my fork in the air doing arithmetic I couldn't stop. $60,000 was N years of my night shifts. I waited for the part where they turned to me. I actually waited. Then I heard myself say quietly, "That's great for Kyle. I've been thinking about houses too, actually. Any help for my down payment someday?" The room got a texture to it. My dad studied his plate and my mother reached over, patted my hand twice, and said the sentence that built everything that came after. "Oh, honey, you can rent somewhere. You've always been fine." Kyle laughed, not meanly, just easily, the way you laugh when the world agrees with you. Somebody changed the subject to countertops. I ate the rest of my pot roast and said almost nothing. And under the good tablecloth with the ivy border, something in me quietly closed a door and locked it. I drove the 20 minutes back to my apartment above the Suds Bucket laundromat, where the dryers thumped under my floor until 11 every night, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad. Nobody got a venting phone call that night. A decade of hospitals teaches you a certain sequence. Chart it, fix it, move on. At the top of the pad, I wrote a number, 48,212. Under it, I wrote what I knew, which wasn't much. I knew houses cost money. I knew Dayton was one of the cheapest markets in the country. I knew I was done asking anyone at that table for anything ever. And the strange thing is that the decision didn't feel hot. It felt like turning off a faucet that had been dripping my whole life. In the morning, I called the credit union I'd banked at since nursing school and asked what a person with my income could borrow. The loan officer was a kind woman named Denise, who chewed gum straight through the call. She ran my numbers and came back with a figure that was about 30,000 less than I had hoped on account of a nurse's salary being a nurse's salary. I remember standing at my window watching a man carry a trash bag of laundry across the parking lot, phone warm against my ear. "Is that enough to buy anything worth owning?" I asked. Denise popped her gum. "Depends," she said, "on whether you're picky." I decided right then that the bank's number would be enough because I would make it enough. I had no idea yet how a person did that, but I knew who would. The answer, it turned out, met on the second Tuesday of every month in a church basement off Wayne Avenue, the Greater Dayton Real Estate Investors Association. Folding chairs, burnt coffee, a laminated sign-in sheet. I found them through the library where I had checked out every book on rental property they had, all 6, and read them on my breaks between rounds. That first Tuesday, I sat in the back row with my legal pad and understood maybe half of what anyone said. There were flippers in expensive boots, a retired school teacher with 14 units, a young woman from the local business who came sometimes to scout stories. And in the corner, an old man in a Carhartt jacket who said almost nothing and got treated like a bishop when he did. Earl Novick, 71 years old, 40 years a landlord, down to his last few buildings and famously unimpressed by everyone. During the break, I introduced myself and told him I wanted to buy a duplex, live in half, rent out the other half. He looked at me the way you look at a parking meter. "Everybody wants to be a landlord," he said, until a toilet calls them at 2:00 in the morning. Then he refilled his coffee and walked off. That was the whole conversation. I drove home oddly happy. He hadn't told me it was a bad idea. He had told me what the price was, which is a different thing entirely, and prices were something I understood. I went back the next month and every month after. It took Earl 3 meetings to remember my name. By May, I'd learned the term that would quietly reroute my whole life, house hacking, and I had found a listing that smelled in every sense like a beginning. Before the beginning, though, I had to survive Kyle's housewarming. 60 people in a 4-bedroom on Sycamore Trail, balloons on the mailbox. My mother giving tour like a docent. "Feel this countertop," she kept saying, "just feel it." The house was objectively lovely. That's the complicated part nobody warns you about. I didn't hate the house. I hated the arithmetic under it. My Aunt Sharon found me by the veggie tray and asked when I was going to settle down and stop renting, and she asked it gently with real affection, which somehow made it worse. I said something about the market. She patted my arm. Then my mother clinked a glass and gave a toast, and I want to quote it exactly because I have never forgotten it. "To family, taking care of family, that's what we do." Everyone raised their drinks, including me. I spent the next hour carrying dirty plates to the kitchen because at every family event I have ever attended, I somehow end up staffing it. And through the window over Kyle's brand new farmhouse sink, I watched my dad show 3 neighbors the garage. I felt like a woman watching a play about a family that looked exactly like hers. That night, back over the laundromat, I opened my laptop and there it was on the listing site. 11 days on market. A 1924 brick duplex on Wren Street, 1 unit occupied, 1 vacant. Needs TLC, which is realtor for bring a flashlight, $148,500. I looked at the photos until 2 in the morning. The sagging porch, the twin front doors, the good bones under the bad paint. Family takes care of family, my mother had said. I decided to become my own. The numbers on Wren Street worked like this, and I ran them so many times the legal pad went soft. Purchase price $148,500. An FHA loan, the kind first-time buyers use, wanted just 3.5% down if I lived in the property, which came to about $5,200. The occupied unit be rented for $850 a month to a longtime tenant named Miss Patris. My whole payment, taxes and insurance included, would land around $1,140. Rent covers most of the mortgage. I cover the difference and the repairs. The house pays me to live in it, more or less. Denise said the credit union walked me through the paperwork and only popped her gum twice. And then I did something that, looking back, was me giving my family one last honest chance. I called my dad, not my mother. My dad, the retired electrician, the man who could read a breaker panel like sheet music. I told him I was looking at a two-family on Wren Street and asked if he'd walk it with me on Saturday. Kick the furnace, tell me what the wiring was worth. There was a pause. I could have parked a truck in. Then he said, well, sure, kiddo, Saturday at 10:00. And here's the thing, he sounded glad. He sounded like a man who had been waiting to be asked something by his daughter and didn't know it. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, grinning like an idiot at a dish towel. For about 4 days, I let myself imagine it. My dad and me in a basement, him pointing his flashlight at the good bones, nodding slow. Saturday came with rain. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. The text said, Kyle's water heater let go, basement's flooding, got to run over with the shop vac. Rain check, kiddo. A house he'd owned for barely a month and its water heater had already quit. I'd learn later Kyle had nicked the pressure valve hanging a bike rack. But that morning, all I knew was the arithmetic again. His emergency, my rain check, always in that order. I sat in my Honda outside the duplex for 1 full minute, watching rain crawl down the windshield. Then I went in alone because the inspector I'd hired at $400 was already on the porch and my money spends whether I'm sad or not. His name was Dale Prout, and he crawled that house like a tick. What he found in Unit B's ceiling was knob and tube wiring. The old stuff pre-war insurance companies hate it. A year earlier that sentence would have meant nothing to me. But I'd spent every break since March reading and I knew 3 things standing in that wet basement. 1, it wasn't dangerous if left alone. 2, it would cost about $6,500 to remediate. 3, it was leverage. I wrote the seller a calm little letter through my agent, attached the inspection page, and asked for $6,500 off at closing. They countered at $5,000 even. I said $6,500 or I walk, and I priced the walk into my voice. They took it. My dad never asked about the house again, not out of malice. It just fell out of his head, the way my things always did. I stopped waiting for the follow-up question around week 2. On a Tuesday in June, Denise called and said the underwriter had cleared me. Congratulations, hun, she said, gumming. You're buying a duplex alone, I thought, every signature of it. Closing took 40 minutes in a title office next to a vape shop. 60-some pages, and I read every one because nobody was coming to catch my mistakes. The title officer kept glancing at the door and finally asked if we were waiting on anyone. A husband, a parent, a realtor boyfriend. It's just me, I said, and she said, good for you, in the voice people use for dogs who can shake. I signed until my hand cramped. Wire transfer, $5,200 down. Closing costs mostly eaten by my knob and tube credit. And then a small brass key on a paper tag was sitting in my palm. And I was a homeowner, and no one on this earth knew except a gum-chewing loan officer and the state of Ohio. I drove straight to Wren Street. Unit A was empty and smelled like cat and 1987. I sat down on the bare floor of what would be my living room, ate a gas station turkey sandwich, and listened to Miss Patris's television murmuring through the wall like a heartbeat. I thought about calling my mother. I truly did consider it, sitting there cross-legged on someone's old carpet with my keys. And then I played the call forward the way you learn to in my family. The pause, the well, that seems risky, honey. The pivot within 90 seconds to how Kyle was doing with his new gutters. My news would be borrowed against or worried over or, worst of all, waved off. So I finished my sandwich and told the empty room instead. It's ours, I said out loud to the water stains. That was the first key. My family had no idea it existed. They wouldn't have believed the next 3 either. Earl Novick turned out to be a prophet. 19 days after closing, at 2:14 in the morning, my phone rang and it was Miss Patris, apologetic and dignified, reporting that the toilet in Unit B was having opinions. I had just come off shift. I stood in her bathroom in my scrubs at 3:00 a.m. with a flange wrench I'd bought that week. A phone propped on the sink playing a repair video at half speed, and I fixed it. Took me 2 hours and one skinned knuckle. Miss Patris made me instant coffee and told me the last landlord would have taken a month. That was my education. That first summer, I patched plaster after night shifts. I learned that paint is cheap and is a love language. I mowed my own lawn with a push mower from an estate sale, waving at neighbors who slowly stopped watching me like a rerun and started bringing zucchini. And the numbers did exactly what the legal pad promised. Mortgage, $1,140. Miss Patris's rent, $850. My personal cost of housing that first full month came to $290, less than half what the laundromat apartment had run me, and I owned the roof over both our heads. Every dollar the house didn't eat went back into the savings account along with every overtime shift the hospital would give me, and they'd give a night nurse plenty. I kept going to Sunday dinner in Kettering, 20 minutes east, and I kept my mouth shut. My mother would ask if I was still in that little apartment, and I would say I'd moved to a place on Wren Street, and she would say, "That's nice, honey," and refill Kyle's tea, which suited me fine. Right up until the Sunday it didn't. It was late September and I decided to test the water. Not confess, just test. Scientists call it a trial balloon. Night nurses call it checking whether the family wants the truth or the comfortable chart. My mother had spent the appetizer asking me to help Kyle set up a little budget, since you're so good with money and he's got property taxes now. Read that twice if you want to understand my family. I was good with money the way a mule is good with weight, a talent for carrying, never for owning. So between the salad and the roast, I said as evenly as I could, "Actually, I've been looking at property myself. Rentals, I've been studying it for a while." And my mother laughed, not cruelly. "That's what I need you to understand. None of it was ever cruel. Cruelty you can at least stand up and fight." She laughed the way you laugh at a child who says she's going to be an astronaut, a soft little puff of air, and said, "On a nurse's salary, honey, the taxes alone." Dennis, tell her about Ted's rental. "The one with the raccoons?" My dad dutifully told the raccoon story. Kyle talked about crown molding. The balloon drifted off unnoticed over a table of people I loved. And I sat there and made a decision I'd keep for the next year and a half. They had answered my question and I would not ask it again. If you've ever tested the water with your own family and watched them laugh before you even finished the sentence, you know exactly why I went quiet. In October, I did something at the REIA meeting I'd been working up to for months. I showed Earl Novick my numbers. Actual printed spreadsheets, purchase price, rent roll, repair log, 4 months of it held out to him at the coffee table like homework. He grunted, sat down, and read every line while the flippers in expensive boots orbited elsewhere. Twice he took out a pencil. He crossed out my repair reserve and wrote a bigger one. "Furnace is from 09, he said. "You're budgeting like it's immortal, it's not." Then he tapped the bottom line and looked at me, actually looked for the first time since April. "You live in the ugly unit," he said. "I do," I said. "You fix your own toilets." I had a video. Something happened in his face that on a different man might have been a smile. From then on, I had a standing seat next to the Carhartt jacket and a running seminar nobody else seemed to want. Capital expenditure, vacancy math. Why you never fall in love with a property that can't pay its own way. Only once did he tell me anything personal. I'd asked carefully if his kids were in the business, and Earl looked at his coffee for a while. "I gave my son everything," he said. "First truck, first house," laid out his restaurant twice. "He's 51 now, doesn't return my calls, and I still can't tell you what he's good at." He turned his cup a quarter turn. "Help that never asks you to grow isn't help." I learned that $200,000 too late. Then he stood, said he was packing something up this winter, whatever that meant, and left me sitting there with a sentence I'd end up carrying like a key. Property number 2 found me in October. An estate sale on Marigold Street, a little 2-bedroom the heirs in Florida wanted gone before the holidays. $85,000 as is, tenants of the deceased long moved out. As is meant carpet with a biography and a kitchen last updated when Nixon was president. but Dale Prout crawled it and found the skeleton sound. This time the loan was conventional investment property, 20% down, $17,000, and the rehab budget was 15 more, most of which I saved by doing demolition myself. If you have never spent your day off tearing out 1974 shag carpet with a utility knife and a respirator, I recommend it over therapy. It's cheaper and you get a floor at the end. It was during that stretch, buying my third utility knife at the Home Depot on Miami's Centerville Road, that I ran into my brother Kyle in the seasonal aisle loading a $600 pizza oven onto a cart. He was delighted to see me. Kyle was always genuinely delighted to see people. It's his best feature, and he talked for 10 minutes straight. The oven was for entertaining. And entertaining mattered because he was getting into real estate. He said him and his buddy Deke were going to flip a house. He was thinking about a home equity line to fund his share. There were courses you could take. Apparently, he said the word passive income twice. He paid for the pizza oven with a card he pulled from the back of his wallet, and I caught the name on it, Carol Holloway. He never once asked what I was doing there, standing in my demolition clothes, drywall dust in my eyebrows, holding a utility knife. I watched him wheel the oven out to his truck and thought, he's going to get hurt. I found the key rack in the Marigold cellar the second week of November in a box of jelly jars under the stairs. Oak, about the length of my forearm with 4 brass hooks, and somebody's wood-burned roses from 50 years ago. Most of the estate's leavings went to the curb, but I stood there in the cellar light holding this thing longer than I can explain. That night, I sanded it on my kitchen table at Wren Street, rubbed it with butcher block oil, and screwed it to the wall beside the back door, dead level. Because if you're going to make yourself a promise, you should at least use a level. On the first brass hook, I hung the Wren Street key. On the second, the Marigold key, shiny from the hardware store that cut it. And then there were the other 2 hooks. And I want to be honest with you about what happened because this is the part I've never told anyone. I stood in my kitchen looking at those 2 empty hooks and I heard my mother's voice, clear as the dryers used to be under my old floor. You've always been fine. That sentence had been handed to me my whole life like a napkin, something to keep my lap clean while everyone else got served. Fine. Standing there smelling of butcher block oil, I decided to take the word all the way literally. If fine was my inheritance, I would compound it. Fine would mean 4. 4 hooks, 4 keys, and not $1 of anyone's envelope. And I gave myself a deadline out loud in the empty kitchen, which is the only witness I trusted. 1 year for the other 2. The rack hung there, catching the street light like it was in on it. 2 hooks filled, 2 to go. Here is what the next stretch actually cost, because the internet loves a montage and I don't. I worked 3 12-hour nights a week in the PICU, picked up a 4th when they begged, and gave Marigold nearly every daylight hour a body can give. After that, I learned to sleep in 2 shifts like a medieval peasant. Twice I woke up at dusk in my Honda outside the hardware store with sawdust in my hair and no memory of deciding to close my eyes. I missed my college roommate's wedding in Columbus because the furnace guy could only come Saturday. I mailed a gravy boat and a lie about a work conflict, and she knew it was a lie. And that friendship has a hairline crack in it to this day that I put there. My world got small and specific, rounds, rosaries of receipts, the smell of joint compound. The one person who saw any of it was Tanya, who'd worked nights with me for 6 years and could read me like a monitor. She helped me haul a vanity up the Marigold steps one frozen Sunday. And afterward, sitting on paint buckets eating drive-thru, she watched me log the receipt in my binder and asked the question I'd been out running since March. "Jordy, who exactly are you proving this to?" I said something about compound interest. She let it sit there between us like a dropped instrument. By Christmas week, Marigold had new floors, a white kitchen, and a tenant. A hospital records clerk and her daughter, $1,100 a month. Lease signed at my kitchen table under the key rack. I remember thinking the hard part was over. The hard part had not started introducing itself yet. Thanksgiving that year was at Kyle's, catered by my mother out of coolers, eaten off the granite. Kyle stood to make an announcement over the pie. He and Deke were officially in business. They'd found a flip house in Trotwood and Kyle was funding his half with a $38,000 home equity line against Sycamore Trail. He said the bank had approved it in 9 days. Said sweat equity, said the course teaches you everything. My parents glowed like a furnace. My mother squeezed his arm and told the table, he's always had the vision. And my dad raised his coffee to real estate men. I sat there holding at that exact moment 2 rental properties, a repair log, and a spreadsheet Earl Novick had personally corrected, and I said, "Pass the beans, I'm not going to pretend that silence was noble." It had rust in it, but I'd tested the water in September and gotten the raccoon story, and you don't pour good news down a drain twice. Here's the beat from that night I actually can't shake, though. Leaving in the cold driveway, my dad caught my elbow and pressed something into my hand, folded small the way he's folded things my whole life. $50, gas money, he said, not meeting my eyes. Don't tell your mother? I drove back to Wren Street with that 50 on the passenger seat like it was riding shotgun, and somewhere on Route 48 I had to pull into a speedway lot for a minute. A $60,000 envelope for Kyle passed across a tablecloth in front of witnesses. $50 for me folded into a palm in the dark with instructions to keep it secret. The exchange rate on being fine. I kept the bill, I still have it. In April, on Earl's calendar like everything now was, I refinanced Marigold. Here's the play in kitchen table English. I'd bought a wreck for $85 and spent $15 making it whole, so about $100,000 all in. Fixed up and rented, the bank's appraiser now valued it at $130,000. The bank would lend me 75% of that new value, $97,500, which paid off the old $68,000 loan and handed me back roughly $25,000 in cash tax-free because borrowed money isn't income. My own down payment and most of my rehab money back in my hands, while the records clerk's rent covered the new payment with room to spare. Investors call it recycling capital. I called it the second wind. Earl checked my math and found one error in the bank's favor, which annoyed him more than if it had been in mine. In May, I put that recycled money down on property number 3. A brick bungalow on Cedar Avenue, $92,000, $1 street over from a hospital shuttle stop, which meant it would never want for tenants. 20% down, $18,400. A traveling respiratory therapist signed at $995 a month before the paint cured. When Denise at the credit union processed the wire, she said, "Hun, you know you're my only client with a color-coded binder," and popped her gum in a way I chose to hear as respect. The third key went on the third brass hook on a Tuesday night in May. I stood in the kitchen with a glass of the good grocery store wine and looked at it. 3 keys, 1 empty hook. 14 months since the envelope. Then the phone rang. Earl Novick, who I had never once heard use the telephone. Coffee tomorrow. I want to show you something. He took me to a duplex on Hawthorne Avenue, 2 blocks off the park. Brick, built 1938, tuck-pointed like a bank vault. Both units rented to long-term tenants who paid like clockwork. Earl's tenants always paid like clockwork because Earl screamed like a customs agent and fixed things the day they broke. We stood on the sidewalk and he told me the thing he'd been packing up all winter was his life. His daughter in Arizona had a casita and a grandkid he'd met 4 times. His knees were done with basements. He'd sold off the rest of the portfolio quietly to other old REIA men, but this one, the last one, his first building ever, he'd been waiting on this one. Realtor would list it at $155, he said, squinting at the porch. I'll carry it for you at $138, 10% down, 6.5%, 20-year note, no bank, no circus. $138 and it's yours. I did the math 3 times standing on that sidewalk with my heart going like a code alarm. The rents were $825 and $875. The note payment would leave real margin. The down payment would just about empty me again, which by now was starting to feel like a family tradition of one. Why me? I asked, because in my family, gifts had card readers attached and I'd learned to check. Earl looked genuinely offended. It's not a gift, it's a note. You'll pay me every month like anybody, he said, then added, grudgingly quieter, because you fix your own toilets. But there was a condition, and his voice went flat and official when he gave it. Bring me your books first, all of them, every property, every month. If they're clean, we talk. If they're stories, we don't. I spread my whole financial life across Earl Novick's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. 3 binders, bank statements, leases, the repair log with the skinned knuckle stains, tax returns, and the legal pad from the night of the envelope, which I included for reasons I didn't examine too closely. He read for 2 hours and 11 minutes. He drank 1 glass of buttermilk, which I will never understand about that generation. Twice he grunted over the vacancy reserve, which I'd learned to pad like a crash cart. When he got to the legal pad, that first page, the 48,000, and a list of things I didn't know yet, he stopped the longest, tapped it once with his big flat thumbnail, and didn't ask. Then he closed the last binder, straightened the stack like a deck of cards, and said, Tuesday, my attorney's office. Bring the 138. That December, 18 months almost to the day after I signed for Wren Street, I closed on the Hawthorne duplex at a lawyer's desk with Earl in his funeral and weddings blazer. Afterward, in the parking lot, he shook my hand with both of his, which from Earl was a ticker tape parade. In January, he moved to Arizona. The 4th key went up on the 4th brass hook that night, and the rack was full. And I'm going to tell you the truth about what that felt like because I promised myself I would. I sat down on my kitchen floor and cried for about 30 seconds, hard, ugly, out of nowhere. And then it passed like weather and I made tea. 4 properties, 6 doors, 18 months. Not one soul at the catering table knew any of it existed. And then in February, my phone lit up with a number I didn't know, and a voice said she was Renee Vasquez from the Dayton Business Courier, and she'd been hearing about me at REIA for a year. Could she buy me a coffee because she thought I was a story? I told Renee Vasquez I'd think about it, and then I thought about almost nothing else for 3 days. Understand what she was asking? Newsprint is permanent in a way the internet only pretends to be. It gets clipped, mailed, laminated, taped to refrigerators in Kettering. My Aunt Sharon has taken the Courier since 1989. If I said yes, there would be no more choosing my moment, no more deciding who deserved which truth. Everyone would know everything on the same Thursday. I made a list of reasons to decline, and it was long and sensible. Tenants' privacy, hospital gossip, relatives with sudden financial emergencies, my mother. Then I sat with the other column, which had exactly 1 entry, and it was Tanya's question from the paint buckets. Who exactly are you proving this to? Because here was the ugly little truth I'd been renovating around for 18 months. Some part of me had been building a case file, every key, every ledger line, exhibits for a courtroom where my family would finally file in, review the evidence, and rule that I had been worth backing all along. That courtroom was never going to convene on its own. I could keep collecting evidence in secret forever, or I could stand up on the record under my own name and be seen on purpose. Not summoned, not discovered, chosen, I called Renee back on a Wednesday before night shift. Okay, I said, but every number gets fact-checked. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. She laughed and said I was the first person who'd ever demanded harder journalism about themselves. Signing that first mortgage had scared me less. Debt comes with a payment plan, being seen doesn't. If you're out there quietly building something your family knows nothing about, tell me in the comments, because what that article set off is the reason I'm telling this story at all. The photographer came on a Saturday in March and posed me on the Wren Street porch with my arms crossed, which is apparently the international sign for small business. Renee spent 2 hours at my kitchen table with the binders, checking every figure like she was auditing me, asking the questions nobody in my family ever had. What's your vacancy rate? What did the furnace cost? What would you tell a nurse with $10,000 saved? At one point, she looked up at the key rack by the back door, 4 brass hooks, 4 keys, and asked what it was. A promise I kept, I said, and she wrote that down, and I let her. Meanwhile, the same week, my actual family was on the group chat, and the news wasn't good, though you had to read between emojis to see it. My mother called me on a Tuesday ostensibly about Easter and spent 20 minutes on Kyle. The Trotwood flip still hadn't sold. 8 months on the market now. Deke was being difficult. The carrying costs were a squeeze. She used the phrase, the market's slow, which I happen to know was false. Dayton was having its briskest spring in years. Houses that are priced right sell. Houses flipped off a weekend course by two men with a pizza oven do not. I asked carefully how Kyle's own mortgage was doing with all that squeezing. A pause. Fine, honey, everything's fine. There it was, the family word doing its family work spackled over something with water damage behind it. I didn't push. I had no standing to push. And one thing a decade of night shifts teaches you is not to quote a patient on a hunch. The paper would run Thursday. Wednesday night, I lay in bed listening to Miss Patris's television through the wall and did not sleep at all. The story ran Thursday, page 1 of the business section above the fold. From rent money to 4 front doors, PICU nurse builds portfolio in 18 months. There I was in newsprint, arms crossed on my own porch next to a little chart of my numbers that Renee had triple-checked, and a pull quote in bold. Nobody was coming to catch my mistakes. So I stopped waiting. By 7:00 a.m. my phone was a slot machine. Tanya texted a row of exclamation points from the break room, where somebody had already taped the article to the refrigerator. Denise from the credit union left a voicemail that was mostly gum and shrieking. 2 nurses I barely knew asked if I'd look at duplex listings with them, and a man I'd gone to high school with proposed, sort of as a joke, I think. At 9:40, Aunt Sharon, who has taken the Courier since 1989, remember, forwarded a photo of the physical page to the family group chat with the caption, "Is this our Jordan?" I watched the little dots appear and disappear. Kyle replied with a thumbs up, which I learned later was reflex. He hadn't read past the headline. My cousin wrote, "Wait, what?" My dad who joined group chats the way cats join swimming lessons, wrote, "That's her grandfather's brick on that porch." I read that one 4 times. And from my mother, who I knew for a fact had her phone in her hand because Sharon confirmed it, there came nothing. Not that day, not Friday, not through the whole weekend. While the casseroles of gossip went door to door through Kettering, 3 days of a silence I could feel through drywall. On the 4th day, Monday, at 8:02 in the morning, her name lit up my phone. "Come by the house, please." They were all 3 in the kitchen when I got there, arranged like a tribunal that hadn't agreed on its verdict. The Courier lay on the counter, folded to my face. My mother didn't offer coffee, which in that house is a weather report. 2 years, she said before I'd gotten my coat off. 2 years you've been sneaking around buying up half of Dayton, letting your own mother find out from Sharon. You lied to this family. I want you to notice the verb, not built, not did, lied. My dad stood by the window, holding the paper like it might fly off. And I watched him read the thing again, moving his lips a little at the numbers all the way to the bottom, then starting over at the top. He never said a word, but he read my article twice while my mother listed my crimes, and I banked that observation somewhere warm without knowing why. "Nobody lied, Mom," I said. "You never asked." Not once in 2 years did anyone at this table ask what I was doing. Because we didn't think we had to worry about you, and there it was again, the family logic. Worry as the only currency of love, and me with my empty account. Then Kyle, who'd been leaning on the counter with his arms crossed over a hoodie, said the sentence he will spend the rest of his life wishing he'd phrased differently. He snorted, jerked his chin at the newspaper and said, "So what? You finally got yourself a house, congratulations." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked at my brother, 38 years old, standing in granite he didn't pay for, and I felt the last 2 years assembled themselves behind my teeth into one even, unhurried question. "Which one?" You could hear the refrigerator. Kyle's face did something complicated, the smirk trying to hold while the eyes caught up. And my mother actually took a step back and looked at the article again, as if the number 4 might have been a typo she could pray away. I didn't stay long after that. There's a kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's inventory, and I left them to take theirs. The fallout arrived on schedule over the next week, and it arrived exactly the way Earl once told me it would. Print your name next to money and watch your phone learn new tricks. My cousin Brandy needed $2,000 just till taxes. A man from church had a can't-miss storage unit thing. Aunt Sharon, bless her entirely, just brought me a lasagna and asked for a tour. And my mother worked the phones all week. I know because Sharon reports like a wire service, telling the aunts in a voice Sharon described as proud and wounded at the same time. Well, we never had to worry about Jordan. That girl always lands on her feet. There it is. If you want the whole ledger of my childhood in one sentence, even my secret was rebranded as their peace of mind. But Thursday evening, while I was scraping paint off the Wren Street porch rail, my dad's truck pulled up. He didn't come in. He stood at the bottom of the steps with his cap in his hands, looked at the brickwork for a while and said, "Your grandfather laid brick on half this street, you know. Rewired most of it too." He touched the porch post once like checking a pulse. "You've got his hands." Then he got back in the truck. He was gone before I trusted my voice. Kyle came to Wren Street on a Sunday evening alone, which had never once happened in the history of us. I watched my brother climb my porch steps like they were a witness stand. And when I let him in, he stood in my little kitchen, turning his cap in his hands, our father's gesture, it turns out, is hereditary, and looked at the 4 keys on the 4 brass hooks for a long time. "That's them, huh?" he said. Then it all came out of him, sitting at my table in no particular order like a pocket emptied. He'd lost the job in November, the real one, the logistics job he'd finally landed that first fall. The consulting had been fiction for years. The Trotwood flip was dead weight. Deke had stopped answering. The thing had eaten the whole $38,000 home equity line and was listed below what they owed. He was 2 payments behind on Sycamore Trail. 2.5 technically, he said, and I watched him learn in real time that halves count. Mom and Dad knew some of it, not the number. He hadn't been able to say the number out loud in that kitchen with the granite. "I keep waiting to feel like a guy who owns a house," my brother said to the table. "It's never once felt like mine. It felt like theirs, and I was house-sitting, and I even screwed that up." He rubbed his face. "I don't know how you did any of this. I had a $60,000 head start, and I'm the one drowning." I didn't say the true thing, which is that the head start was the anchor. It wasn't the night for it. And anyway, he had said the word himself, drowning. At the door, he stopped. "Mom's calling a family meeting Sunday about the houses." A beat, both of ours. My mother beat the meeting by 3 days. She showed up at Wren Street on Thursday with a coffee cake, which in her language is a diplomatic pouch, and asked to see the place. I gave her the tour. She ran her thumb along my window trim, tested the porch rail, said, 11 different ways." In the kitchen, she stopped in front of the key rack and touched the wood-burned roses, and something moved through her face that I'd never seen on it before. "My mother had one like this," she said. And then, without sitting down, holding her purse in both hands like a railing, my mother told me a story I had never heard in 34 years. Her father's farm up near Piqua, 200 acres, a good brick house, and when he passed, it went all of it to her brother. Gary got the farm because Gary needed the farm. She said he'd failed at everything else, that's just how it was done. "I was 24, she said. "Daddy told me, you've got Dennis. You'll be fine." She looked at my key rack while she said his words, and I don't think she heard the echo, and that was the loudest part of the whole afternoon. "And I was fine," she said, straightening. "I made my peace. You feed the child who's drowning, Jordan, that's not favorites, that's triage. That's what a mother is." For one breath, I saw her at 24, standing in a farmhouse kitchen being handed the same napkin they handed me. And my anger had to make room for something more complicated with grief in it. Then she snapped her purse shut, kissed my cheek, and laid the ask on the table on her way out, casual as a coaster. "Sunday then, honey, and Kyle is drowning. Bring your checkbook." Sunday, same dining room, same tablecloth with the ivy border, and I would bet the Cedar Avenue bungalow that this was deliberate. Because my mother has never once staged a scene by accident. Pot roast again. My chair was the folding one from the garage, the way it always somehow was. And I sat in it and waited through 20 minutes of weather and casserole diplomacy before my mother nodded at my dad. And my dad, looking older than I'd ever clocked him, brought out a manila folder and slid it across the table to me. The mirror was so exact my skin prickled. 2 years ago, almost to the week, an envelope had crossed this tablecloth going the other direction. "We talked to a man at the bank," my mother said in her church committee voice. "The one with options in it, a refinance. It folds the equity line back in, gets the payment down to where Kyle can manage it while he gets on his feet, but with the late payments and the job. They won't do it in Kyle's name alone." The folder sat in front of me. Pre-approval worksheets, a cosigner line highlighted in yellow, and a ballpoint pen my mother placed beside it gently, like a communion wafer. "With your income and your credit, the man says it goes through clean," she said. "It's a signature, Jordan. It costs you nothing." She reached over and took my hand, and her eyes were wet and absolutely certain. And my mother said the words she had been saving for 34 years, the ones she believed were an embrace. "You wanted to be part of this family. Honey, this is what family does. This is your moment," the refrigerator hummed. Kyle studied the tablecloth like it might be flipped for profit. $60,000 had bought him a seat at this table forever. They were offering me mine for the price of a signature. I want to walk you through what happened in my head in the next 4 minutes because it's the reason this story exists. First, the nurse in me took vitals out loud, evenly. "What's the payoff on Sycamore Trail?" 218 about, and the equity line's 38, Kyle said to his plate. "How many payments behind?" 2, silence. 2.5, "What's the new payment if this goes through, and what's Kyle's income right now today, not the income we're hoping for?" Warehouse application pending. "Unemployment till then?" My mother watched me ask like I was performing surgery on the table itself. She'd expected tears or a hug, and she was getting an underwriter. And here's what my vitals said. On paper, I could survive signing. That's the truth, and I won't pretend otherwise. If it all went wrong, if Kyle missed and I had to cover his payment to protect my credit, which held up 4 buildings and 6 leases, it would bleed me slow, but it wouldn't kill me. I could afford to buy their love. It was, for the first time in my life, actually for sale, sitting right there next to the gravy, marked down to 1 signature. And then the second thing rose up, quiet in Earl's flat voice and Tanya's breakroom voice and my own voice talking to 2 empty brass hooks. What had I actually built these 18 months, 4 buildings? Or 1 long exhibit for a courtroom where this family would finally rule I'd been worth choosing? Because here was the verdict, arriving early. They would choose me now, tonight. The moment the ink dried, I'd be inside the circle at last, the daughter who saved the house. I looked at that yellow highlighted line, and every number I had said no, and every year of my childhood said sign, and I picked up the pen and my mother exhaled. And I set it back down on the far side of the folder. "No," I said, not loud, the way you'd read a lab value. "I'm not signing, and I'm not writing a check. And before anyone leaves this table, hear the rest, because I'm not done." My mother's mouth had already opened. Something in my tone closed it. I turned to Kyle and I talked to him. Only him, the way I talk to a family in a hallway at 3:00 a.m. when the news is bad and the plan matters more than the grief. "Here's what I will do, and it's yours if you want it. Every Sunday, you and me, this binder, my kitchen table, we list Sycamore Trail this week, price to actually sell, not to save face. We call the bank about the equity line before it goes to collections. There are hardship terms if you get ahead of it, and I know the words to use. We build you a budget you can survive off your real income, the warehouse job, not the story income. And when it sells, I put my hand flat on the folder. You'll walk away clean. Broken, but clean. Then, if you want it, my marigold house turns over in June. $1,100 a month. You'd fill out the application like every other human being on earth. First month and deposit, and if your numbers pass my screening, you sign my standard lease. And I will be the most boring landlord you've ever had." Kyle was staring at me the way you stare at weather on the horizon, trying to tell if it's moving toward you or away. "You'd be my tenant, not my charity. You'd pay on the first, and you'd learn what everything costs, which is the one thing." I looked once at the folder. At all that highlighted yellow rescue, the one thing nobody in this family ever let you find out. Somebody told me once, help that never asks you to grow isn't help. I'm offering the kind that asks you to grow. My mother stood up so fast her chair barked on the floor. Elise, her voice had lost the committee in it. This was another register higher, cracked at the edges, one I'd only ever heard through walls. He's your brother, not an applicant. Your whole life we fed you, clothed you, raised you. And the first time this family asks you for one thing, one signature, you sit at my table and you offer him paperwork. She had the folder in her hand now, shaking it. A pre-approval sheet slid loose and seesawed to the floor. You've got 4 houses, Jordan 4, and your own brother is drowning. And you, after everything? And there my mother ran out, right at the edge of the thing she'd never once had to say out loud in her life. Because until that moment, the ledger had always simply been obeyed. I stood up too, not fast. I picked up the fallen sheet, squared it, and set it on the table. You're right, Mom, I do have 4 houses. I put on my coat while the refrigerator hummed, and you never once had to worry about me. I know that's your compliment, so here mine, I'm fine. I made sure of it myself because somebody at this table had to be. I said goodnight into a silence with a heartbeat in it. And I was 3 steps down the front walk when I heard the storm door, and it was my dad, hatless in the cold, an old electrician holding the rail. He looked at me for a second that had 34 years pressurized into it. Send Kyle the Sunday Time, he said low. That was all he had. It was also from that particular man on that particular porch, very nearly everything. I nodded. He went back inside to the sound of my mother crying over the casserole dish and the door shut. And I understood with total clarity that I had just eaten my last pot roast at that table. I drove back to Wren Street with the radio off, 20 minutes of wet road and my own breathing. And I kept waiting for the collapse, the shaking hands, the pullover and sob that 2 years of grinding and 1 detonated dinner had surely earned. It didn't come. What came instead, standing in my dark kitchen with my coat still on, was the strangest lightness I have ever felt, and I want to try to hand it to you whole. The streetlight was doing what it always did to the key rack, 4 brass hooks, 4 shadows like little fish hooks up the wall. And I stood there and realized I was looking at keys, that's all. Keys to buildings where the furnaces ran and the rents cleared, and a records clerk's daughter had a bedroom with good light. For 18 months, those hooks had been a courtroom exhibit, a closing argument, a whole trial I was secretly preparing for a jury that I now understood would never, ever be seated. No matter how many keys I hung. Because the verdict in Kettering had been written before I was born in a farmhouse kitchen near Piqua on the day they handed my mother her napkin. You can't win a case in that courtroom. You can only stop filing. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed once against the counter. Kyle, no apology, no speech, and none needed. He'd kept it blunt and it was somehow perfect. What time Sunday? I stood in my kitchen and laughed until I had to hold the counter. And then I texted back, 9. Bring your bank statements? And I hung my car key on the first hook where it fit just fine beside everything else I owned. Here's where everyone ended up because you've earned the accounting. Sycamore Trail listed the following week, priced to sell over my mother's objections and Kyle's flinching, and closed in June for $282,000. After the payoff on the mortgage, the equity line, and the closing costs, my brother walked away with a little over $6,000, and for the first time in his adult life, 0 debt. The Trotwood flip sold that same spring for less than Deke, and Kyle owed on it. Kyle's share of the wreckage came to nothing, which he says out loud now at my kitchen table like a man reading his own x-ray. The warehouse job came through, 2nd shift, forklift certified, benefits. In July, he filled out my rental application at that same table, and I ran his numbers the way I'd run anybody's. And I made him wait 2 days for the answer. Tanya says that was petty, and Tanya is correct, and I regret nothing. He moved into Marigold with a standard lease and a security deposit he paid himself. 4 months in, I've collected 4 rent checks, every single one of them early. My brother, it turns out, likes being someone who pays early. Likes it the way a man likes a muscle he didn't know he had. Sunday mornings, he comes to Wren Street with his binder and his bank statements, and we do the budget. And some Sundays, my dad's truck is already at the curb when he gets there. Because Dennis Holloway has decided, without any announcement at all, that my gutters and porch rails and outlets require his personal supervision. He and Kyle rewired my basement light in October. It took them 4 hours and 2 arguments, and I heard my brother laugh down there like he was 12. My mother has not set foot on Wren Street since the coffee cake. We speak at other people's events politely, like former coworkers. In August, a birthday card came, addressed in her round church bulletin hand, and inside it said, "Mom. That's all, no note, no verse." The ledger is still open on her side of the table, and I've stopped expecting her to close it, because I understand now who handed it to her and in whose kitchen. And what it cost her to survive believing it was love. The $60,000 is simply gone, absorbed into closing costs and granite and a dead flip. And nobody at any table mentions it ever. And there is a lesson in that silence I'll let you assemble yourself. Earl sends postcards from Arizona with no greeting and no signature, just sentences. The last one said, "Grandkid can use a tub now, books still clean." They are Earl. All 6 doors cash flowing, boring as a heartbeat, which is the highest compliment in the business. And that is where the money went. The rest of what happened isn't about money at all. Last Sunday morning, I was on my porch with coffee in the cold gold light that Wren Street does better than any street I own when Kyle's truck pulled up early. He got out with his binder under his arm and a bag of hardware store donuts. And he stopped on the walk, looked up at me on the steps my grandfather's brick built, and hollered the old question, the one from the granite kitchen. Except this time, he was grinning when he asked it. "Hey, you home?" I looked through the kitchen window where 4 brass hooks caught the morning sun, 4 keys hanging there like notes in a cord. Plus a car key that has no idea how it earned the neighborhood. And I said it, I said it. "Which one?" And my brother laughed and climbed my steps, and we went inside to do the work. Here is the only thing I know for sure after all of it. Being fine was never the consolation prize they told me it was. It was the inheritance I wrote for myself, 1 key at a time. And nobody gets to slide it across a table, and nobody gets to take it back.